Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Anise Fisher. I am the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching, and I am so excited to bring us together to engage in some conversation around conscious and adaptive leadership and how can we use these two concepts to thrive in an evolving world. We have roughly about 30 minutes together, so I will invite you to engage in the chat box, and then I will leave some time at the end for Q&A. Custom to every time we do a webinar, we will always leave you with a PDF handout that you can take back to use with your teams. So before I begin any work, I always start with the land, labor, and solidarity acknowledgement. I am based in the city of Chicago, and I'm on the ancestral lands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. And we always start with this land acknowledgement, one, to acknowledge the resilience and the ongoing connection to the land, the water, and community to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. And we also stand in solidarity with the desire for the return of land and reparations. We also acknowledge the labor of enslaved peoples whose forced labor built the financial foundations of our country and much of the infrastructure of our country. Alongside that, we also consider the experiences of our Chinese, Japanese, and Mexican brothers and sisters who were forced through economic exploitation to build the infrastructure of this country. And so what we say is that we believe the path forward to the erasure of colonialism, to move forward and create a much more just world, a world that honors our collective humanity, is through solidarity, which is this idea of us creating a world where all of our humanity can be honored. So a little bit about us as Developing Capacity. As an organization, we exist to expand the capacity of leaders to do good in the world. We seek to build a world that's much more compassionate and much more just. At the end of the day, we want to create a society where people can thrive freely. And we do this through a variety of different ways. We work across multiple sectors, but often we are working with people through the transformation of their personal leadership, whether it's through executive coaching, whether it's through working with foundation and fellowship programs to build the capacity of leaders of organizations. We do the capacity building of teams, so boards, leadership teams, ERGs. And some folks decide like we want to shift the entire culture of our organization. We want to go on the long journey. And then our final bucket of work is around data-informed decision making. Our belief is that in order to expand the capacity of leaders, that we need to be thinking about entering in at the place that works best for that particular individual or organization. So let's get to the juiciness. I like this sister here with her hands on her head because I feel like this is how we feel sometimes when we wake up and we look at the news. We're saying, what is going to happen today? And so part of the reason why we wanted to have this session on adapting in 2025 and beyond is because there are a lot of conditions that are pressing on our leadership. Whether you are at the helm of the organization, you are the director, you're the, or if you're a member of a team. And so it's important for us to begin to not only acknowledge what's happening, but to also to provide space for us to figure out how do we navigate through this. And I'm just going to name this. And if you feel like you're impacted by any of these things, feel free to share it in the chat box. But, we've been experiencing not only an attack on DEI, but just the desire to humanize each other as people on this earth. There are a lot of geopolitical tensions rising. Yesterday, 2 days ago, your pension plan was great. Yesterday, your pension plan was horrible. Yesterday, your pension plan was great. We don't know what your pension plan will look like today. But we are constantly navigating these geopolitical tensions that are impacting us. We're seeing a reduction in federal funding. And what we've been hearing leaders, because we work across sector, is leaders are trying to figure out, okay, I got to make decisions in ambiguous environments, but sometimes the environments are volatile. And they're volatile because there's external forces that are pressing on my ability to make the decision that I want to make. And ultimately, I want to be integrous, right? I want my team and the people that I serve to know that I'm being integrous. If any of this resonates with you, I would love for you to say resonates in the chat box so I can see whether or not we're coming down your driveway. And then the next thing is just the technological advancements that's really impacting all of us. Um, and I'm not here to say that AI is good or bad, but we are realizing that AI and this idea of automations is really reshaping all of our fields at this given point. Now, in most email systems, when you go to type your email, I don't know if folks have seen this, it asks you if you want to reframe your email. Has anybody seen that in their email lately in Gmail? Where you go to type your email and it says, oh, here's how we suggest you to write the email. 6 months ago, that was not in our Gmail account. Now we have someone saying, let me tell you how to write the email. So the piece is, how do we prepare ourselves? How do we engage during these particular times? And so what I want to offer up to you is two frameworks that I think could be helpful for us. As I share with anybody that do work with us, this is an offering. You can choose to take the offering or you can leave it on the table. Our hope is just to give people a different way to think about things. Are folks familiar with the concept of adaptive leadership and the work of Ronald Heifetz? I see some heads shaking there. So I actually studied under Ronald Heifetz when I was at Harvard. He was actually the third chair on my dissertation committee. So I'm really a fan of his work around adaptive leadership and this concept of how do you bring people together in times of uncertainty, partner with them to think about how to lead change while also helping people to remain resilient, that the group doesn't break in the process. And then I'll be sharing a little bit of my conscious leadership framework that focuses a lot on self-awareness, how you use your power, how do you have ethics in your decision making. And that work I have been teaching leadership classes in higher education. I'm teaching a version of this class at our Department of Corrections. And then we use this framework with all of our partners across industries. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was this idea of self-awareness and leadership. And we talk a lot about this idea of understanding your influence, your strengths, and where you might have your own biases. And part of that for us is asking yourself, how are my actions and decisions affecting the team in our organization? So let me just take a straw person's poll. How many folks have posed that question to yourself within this last 30 days? Maybe you can just comment in the chat box. And there's no judgment either way, if you have or you have not. But it's something for us to think about. We always talk about in conscious leadership, when you show up, you get to choose how you use your mindsets, behaviors, and emotions in any given moment. And part of that is being able to take an introspective look to say, how are my actions and decisions impacting my team, both constructively and also challenging? And where is it a challenge to the team? But also thinking about, what influence do I have to shape the direction of my organization? And I think this is a really interesting question to have, because in most of our industries, we're experiencing, okay, I have influence in my department, but there's like this external force, whether it's the board, whether it's people outside of your organization, that's kind of pushing on your ability to have some influence in your leadership. Does anybody experiencing that right now? Where you feel like you have the authority in your area, but you have some other people kind of pressing in on you externally. So part of what we talk about in this process of self-awareness in your leadership is, we teach a process around power mapping and really thinking about, where do you have your boundaries of authority in your own individual organization, and then what are some levers you might need to pull outside of it. And the third piece we talk about with thinking about your own way that you influence situations is your identity and socialization. And I'm going to respond, Jeanette, because I see you in the chat box. I haven't I haven't missed it. But this idea is like, how do my identity and socialization shape my interactions with other people? And for us, we think that this is important because who we are in the world and the way we've been socialized in the world impacts the way we lead and interact with others. I'm a Black woman, And I'm a Black woman from the city of Chicago. And within that has its own culture and how I show up and engage. And so I can't take those things off. I don't remove those things. There is a way that I move um, in the world that's native and true to me. And it doesn't mean that's the same way that Petunia leads because she's a Black woman I'm perceiving to be. Like, we all lead differently, but there are some cultural things that we should be aware of and how that shapes our interactions with other people. And it's nothing to be aware of in a negative way, but it's to say that, like, my view on the world, my justice orientation, growing up in the city of Chicago, being the daughter of immigrant parents, that definitely shapes the way I move. And I should be aware of that. So when we think about this practice of self-awareness and leadership, we always say, okay, what can I take away from what Dr. Fisher just said today that I can implement personally? Well, once a month, you can take a few minutes to ask yourself these self-check questions. And we always say that, you can make an appointment with yourself, put it on your calendar, and just ask yourself these 3 questions as a way to stay in tune with your leadership, because most people days are pretty full. So you might not be able to ask these questions all the time, but it could be an opportunity for you to ask it at the end of the month, or provide a space for your team to answer these questions for you. So create an opportunity for anonymous feedback for the team to answer these questions for you, or you can also use it to be posed to your team. So we think that, the work that you do as a leader is also in service of the work that you do as a team. And when you learn and grow, the team comes along with you. And I'm seeing in the chat box, there's a lot of, yes, with international students, there's a lot of uncertainty in the space right now, unfortunately. The next thing is intentionality in leadership and thinking about how you align your actions with your values. And part of that, we say, is to know your core values and align your core values with your actions. We do an activity with folks called Connecting to Your Core, where we give people, teams, the opportunity to think about, okay, what are your core values? And then if we were to poll the top 3 people you work with, would they say they see your core values in action? And then if so, what's the difference between would they see it and would they not see it? And then what would you want to do differently to lead more with your core values? And so we believe our core values could be great decision-making filters for you as an individual leader, but also there's an opportunity for you to build a culture of accountability and love on your team by providing a space to identify your collective team core values. So I want to pose this question to the group. Have you all had any sessions with your team discussing the collective team core values? Like what's important to your individual teams and what they value? Okay. Well, that could be a great opportunity, a great activity for you to do with your team, because we often lead with our own individual core values. But at a time when there is so much ambiguity and so much uncertainty, wouldn't it be beautiful to be able to say, when we make our team decisions, we are making them based on a collective set of team values? That I've thought about Jeanette, I've thought about Zach, I've thought about Jessica, I've thought about Petunia. We've said collectively, this is what we're going to use to guide our values, to guide our decisions, excuse me, at a time when there is uncertainty in this process. And what we believe is that when we create the space, not only to lead from your own individual values, but you open up the space with your team, then you can begin to think about how are we making values driven decisions in the work that we're doing. And right now, there's so much pushing on us to move fast, move quick, make the decision right now, and catch the people up later. And so that can sometimes put a gap between us and our team and us and our people, because they feel like the ship is moving without them and they're not being engaged in the process. So one in practice tool that we would recommend is, one, collectively with your team, creating a space for what are your team core values and using that as a decision-making filter. And we often encourage people to ask one another ask your team, but also think about this from yourself. Like, are my actions aligning with my core values? But ultimately, is it honoring the shared humanity of the people around me? And so, one thing we often say to people is at your team meeting, you could pose a question: how do we honor our collective humanity as a team? What does that look like in practice? It's a way for us to be able to center actions with values, but to be more intentional, not only in my own leadership, but in the way that I handle my team and in strategic planning processes, precisely as a way to guide us and direct us in this process. Let me pause to see, does anybody have any questions as far as I'm going through this? Yeah, okay. The next piece that we talked about is this idea of ethical leadership. So I want to ask people, how do you define ethical leadership? And you can come off mute or you can put it in the chat box. What does ethical leadership look like for you? How do you know that you're being ethical in your leadership?
One aspect of being consistent with your words and your actions, that they're in alignment, is part of ethical leadership for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is a great check. Your values align with your actions. I see someone put not swaying on values based on personal gain. Yeah. +1 to what Jeanette said. For us, we talk about this idea of like ethics and we should lead as a force for good, but we also want to offer, you know, do we have a conversation about what does ethical leadership look like as a team? What does it look like to you? What's your own barometer for that? And I see in the chat box, moving in ways that benefits the organization and less focused on individual achievement. For us, it's this idea of being inclusive. It also has an accountability factor to it, but it's also about being fair to folks and thinking about, is my leadership creating spaces where we can hear from multiple voices, where people feel like they're being heard, seen, and respected? And if that's not happening, that there's some accountability that takes place within the organization. And for us, ethical leadership, when we talk about conscious leadership, ethical leadership means we must address biases. We must address when people are not able to access parts of our organization, whether it's access resources, whether it's accessing promotion, whether it's accessing flexibility. We want to be taking a look at self plus the organization. And a part of that is maintaining a commitment to transparency. And transparency, we know, comes through people feeling like they know how decisions are being made, that people are open and people communicate with them. I'm curious to ask the group, because I want to make this a little bit interactive. How do you know that transparency is present? When you're on a team or you're working with other people, how do you know that something is transparent? And you could just put it in the chat box. Mm-hmm. Thank you for your honesty, folks. I see ensuring all members have the same information are left to interpret it for themselves. That's a biggie. We ever been in a situation where you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, really? This is news to me. Why didn't you know it? And it can be hard to say sometimes. Part of it is access to resource. Part of it is feeling like someone's telling you the truth. Um, Decisions that are made in a consistent manner, and you share the importance of learning from failure. We actually talk about that on the next slide. This idea of people being able to fail forward and it be a culture where we have to innovate, because we are in a period of time where we are innovating. And we talk about leadership sometimes as your best guess. Like, given the conditions around you, sometimes I'm just taking my best guess in the moment based on all the information I know. And from there, we'll learn from that particular decision. So, something that we think folks can do in practice to model ethical leadership is to have a discussion with your team. What does inclusion look like for us? What does accountability look like? And what does fairness look like? And part of why we often say to discuss this with your team or to talk about it with the people you work with, because I might think something is ethical, but someone else on my team may not think it's ethical. They may think it's very unfair. But when you open the space to have a conversation of, okay, what are we collectively perceiving as fair? What are we collectively perceiving as accountability and inclusion? That gives you an opportunity to have some level of a guide for inclusive decision making. Now, if you are the positional authority in your organization, like you're the director or associate director or VP, I do believe that you should have some of those visions yourself as the person that's leading the organization. But a part of what Kuzis and Posner talks about in their 5 practices of exemplary leadership is this idea of being able to have shared vision around things. And you know that you have healthy and sound teams when there's some shared visioning around it. And when you discuss these items as a team, it also gives you the opportunity to be able to have a collective conversation when someone may accuse you of being unethical when you're not. Has any one of us ever been accused of doing something and you're like, this is not true? I did not do that. I mean, let's raise our hands. People have maybe come and accuse you. And part of that is you having some collective pieces where you've made some collective decision making where you can share with folks. Okay, the last 2 I want to get through and then open it up for conversation is empathy and perspective taking. So we're big on leading with compassion. And I think now more than ever, we have to have empathy. Empathy does not mean we don't hold people accountable. But empathy and for us is in this idea of how do we have power with versus power over. Now, obviously, there's a positional power that you possess based on your seat in the organization. But we also believe in the importance of sharing power, sharing decisions, but also being honest with your team of when you can have collective decision making and when that's not possible. And part of that helps to create what we consider to be trust in leadership because people know what's going on, they know what's happening, and they know how decisions are being made. And another piece for us is being mindful of folks' emotions and actively listening to people. We do have a session that we did a couple of months ago on building resilient team care or resilient team leadership that you can look back on, but it talks a lot about that third bullet around sustaining leadership energy. So we talked a lot about in that session. What is your team care plan? So how do you create resiliency as a part of self-care for your team, one at the individual level and then at the team level? So we provided some resources and supports around how do you have a collective conversation. And we do believe that's really important for us. We do need to be empathetic that people are managing and juggling a lot of different things before they even come to the front door or log online for their job. And so how do we honor the humanity of those folks while at the same time recognizing we do have responsibilities? And so here, establishing regular check-ins with your team members and also practicing active listening. And the last piece here that we wanted to discuss was around adaptive leadership. I saw somebody shake their head of having been exposed to the work of Ronald Heifetz. If you have not read the book Leadership on the Line, I highly recommend it. It talks a lot about the practice of adaptive leadership and how do you continue to lead in dangerous conditions. And one of the things that adaptive leadership posits is that when you are dealing with complex change or you're trying to shift culture, it becomes very dangerous. And so part of this idea of adaptive leadership is knowing the type of problems you're trying to solve. Are you trying to solve a technical problem, which is a quick fix? So if I work in housing, I think there are a lot of folks on housing from here. If the door keeps falling off, I'm not going to fix the door. I'm calling maintenance. That's pretty much a technical fix. Okay, that's a technical problem. I'm calling the expert. But if the door keeps coming off the hinge after we have called in maintenance to fix this, then we have an adaptive problem, because obviously it's not the door, it's the way that people are handling the door, which means that we need to do some learning. It means that we need to bring in multiple stakeholders, people who are coming in and out this room, to have a conversation. So that's what adaptive leadership says. Most of our problems are adaptive. It requires bringing multiple people around the table to answer them. Adaptive leadership also talks about this idea of, in order to lead through uncertainty, you have to be willing to create a culture of experimentation, a culture of failing forward, a culture of let's try something different in order to be able to help solve the problem that we're trying to, in order to be able to solve the problem, but that we create a culture of flexibility around that, but it's also guided by our core values. So one of the things that we talk about, for folks who feel like, okay, I'm trying to lead my department in one way, but say the larger institution has a different feeling. One of the things we say is like, you can't disassociate yourself from your larger company or your larger institution. Like, you're connected to them, you're a unit within it. So one of the things we talk about with adaptive leadership is, do you understand the values of your larger organization and the values of your unit? And what are those values? And then what does the larger institution feel like they're losing if your department shows up in the fullness of who they are? Because a lot of times people don't resist change, they resist loss. They resist the loss of relationships. They resist the loss of autonomy when you tell them they have to do something different. They resist, loss of predictability and knowing what to do and how to do it every day, but now you want them to change and behave differently. So adaptive leadership really calls you to understand not only your values, but the values of people around you, as a way to be able to be more creative and thoughtful in your proposals and your plans in order to experiment, to try something different. And so the in practice tool here is around being open to dialogue that focuses on co-creating solutions with your team, and being open to different ways of knowing and different ways of seeing things. I'm going to drop in the chat box here our handout, which will allow you to kind of think about how to apply these things. But in the end, for us, we want to encourage you to think about one thing. We've put 4 different ways that you can look at conscious and adaptive leadership. To think that you're going to go and do all of this right now is just obviously unrealistic. So you might think about, which part of my leadership do I want to reflect on? What question do I want to focus on? Ethical leadership? Do I want to think more about being intentional in my leadership? And then taking that in practice question and working on that for the next 2 to 3 months. We believe in pacing ourselves through change. The second thing we say is, be willing to engage and listen. Not only just take this information in for yourself, but really begin to ask your team and the people that work most closely with you to invite perspectives in about these aspects of your leadership and how you are working together. And the last piece we say here is to be willing to adapt and innovate. None of us could have, well, some of us predicted the conditions that we're in right now, but the way that we're going to be able to get through this is to be flexible, and to continue to challenge ourselves to adapt and shift. The last slide here is just an opportunity for questions. And when you get our follow-up, um, you'll get access to this video, and then you'll also get this link. But I did want to open it up to see if anybody had any questions. I'm going to stop the recording so that people's questions are not recorded, just for privacy's sake.